It is good to see everyone. How did you like this part about democracy?
Interesting.
I think that I love her basic take. So I'm going to just start with that and then let you guys just open up. That democracy was not tried until Black America essentially pushed us into deciding that all men are created equal into something larger, right? And that's when we began to start practicing more democracy. And we haven't practiced it most of our lifetime. I mean, most of the lifetime of the nation, of the history of the nation. But this part, well, not completely, but we don't include blacks. No. Women are included, but not perfectly. African Americans are included, but not perfectly. There's a lot that are not included perfectly in that. But at least now we have more of a sense of it's supposed to be. When that was written, all men, it really meant all wealthy landowning men.
White men.
White.
Yeah.
Right. And
an ideal.
Yeah, and I don't even necessarily even fault them for what they didn't put in there. I kind of do, but not only. It's that they didn't know enough to say women should be included. They weren't enlightened enough to say that Native American whose land you're taking should be included, right? And so there are a lot of people that were excluded just because of the assumptions that they carried into that space. And so I love that in this section, what she's doing is she's saying, let's live out that creed. Let's not live the small part of it, but the largest piece of it. And we're still learning how to live into that, what it means to live that out. So having said that, that's my big insight. What's your big insight? What did you take out of this section? Or what did you question about this section? Because here's the good news. You don't have to accept it because she says it. Right? She's trying to support everything she's saying with her best view and with facts as she knows them. But you don't have to accept it. But she does a pretty good job presenting her case, doesn't she? So what struck you? Barbara, yes.
Jim, group hi. I was struck. Well, first of all, I'm finding it terribly, harshly difficult to read. Such a stellar truth about my blindness. Culturally, I belong to a 12-step program that's worked to save my life. And it's got hokey sayings all over the world on every meeting room. And one of them is, you are only as sick as you are secret. And this book has opened, like Pandora's box, a revelatory awareness of how blind I have been. And we collectively, black, white, brown, yellow, whatever, are never going to mend the fences in United States. And we are the culprits, United States. We're not united. And here are the founding fathers in their later life writing, she documents it very well, the duplicity of this gap between what we say is real and how we actually practice and think and teach.
Yeah. And Barbara, that became especially apparent for me in the second half of the second quarter or so of it, when she got into the Reconstruction post-Civil War era and how we went back to essentially what we'd had before without the term slavery placed on it, because that's what we knew, that's what we wanted. I should say that's what South white people wanted. And it was easier. Rutherford B. Hayes sold, the ability to get a president on, I'm gonna take out the troops. Because it was easier.
And that's when all the domination just started. And that's got people,
Speak louder.
after this horrific event of slavery, that was a continuation.
Yeah, I would say it's not where domination started, it's where domination became hidden.
It just continued in a
And
different form.
yeah, but what I mean by that is that at least pre-Civil War, we had very open racism, very open and honest, if you will. The system was what it was. Afterwards, we tried to pretend it was one thing. After Reconstruction and the failure of Reconstruction, and we continued with a pre-Civil War type of thing, but we acted like it wasn't.
Right.
Remember, you're speaking over to these guys, so speak loud.
When I studied history, one of the virtues that I was taught was historical relevance.
Yeah.
In other words, we should not judge the actions of generations in the past against the standards of today.
That's right.
That certainly doesn't mean that this project is inappropriate. I think it's having a very important corrective effect in this way. Over the 2 centuries of our national existence, we have come to deify the founding fathers, literally to the point, and I want to preface this by saying, I don't think I admire anyone much more than Rusty Bowers after his appearance before the January 6th.
Yeah.
I suspect Arizonans know a lot more about him than I do, but I was very impressed with his integrity, personal integrity. The one part of his remarks that I had a hard time with, but again, I applied a little cultural relativism when I said there are millions of people that share his point of view, is that somehow the writing of the Constitution was a divinely inspired act. It certainly wasn't that I don't think the founding fathers found that it was, believed that it was either. Certainly nobody could say that God inspired the 3/5 clause.
Yeah.
Yeah. That said, I think that part of the hostility that the 1619 project has been greeted with is we have so deified the prior aspects of our history that anything that attempts to flesh out that picture becomes demonized. The founding fathers. And I admire the effort at trying to, do what historians always do, which is try to get a more well-rounded picture, a more comprehensive picture of what's going on.
But breaking a monopoly is always difficult. Because whoever holds that monopoly holds it because they have all kinds of power and influence, and you have to figure out how to get around all of that, which has been built up to stop you from being able to get past it, to be able to challenge. And so you're right, we canonize. And the problem with canonization is we think that because it's God inspired, that it's without failure, that there's no human that's put into it. Because I think that the divine pushed us in some of the things that are done in the Constitution. I think there's wonderful things that are there that help us to do government better than a lot of government, right? I don't think that that means that the whole thing is the writing of God on a piece of paper, right? And that's what we often do, is cause it to be that. And so everything's completely divinely inspired. And you're right, the 3/5 clause is a horrible clause to apply to anybody, whoever they are. right?
Mhm.
Not even name them, because that clause, they don't know what we're talking about, it's this phrase. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union according to the respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all persons.
That was applied to black people, basically.
It was, but do you notice they weren't even named?
The ones that were pushing it.
That's right. They didn't even have the guts to actually name what they were saying. It's just, and all those 3/5 people, whoever they are.
As I say, it was, in a way, you could say it was a triumph for a cynical triumph, because the Southerners wanted, the Northerners wouldn't have thought of it. And I think,
Yeah.
again, to apply historical relativism in the defense of the founding fathers, I'd say, I'm not aware of any other government in the Western world where women had suffrage in the year 1789.
Right, right.
No, I'm not.
I'm not either. I'm not either. Don. Yes, go Barbara.
Jim? Another thought that has come forth and I'm still reading our inability, our collective United States of America inability to look at ourselves fearlessly and tell ourselves the truth has led to what we have now with rampant no gun control. I mean, it lays right at the door of our current problems. This inability to be truthful with ourselves and take responsibility. I have spent this past week in reading this book, telling everybody I know about it, and recognizing that I'm the reason Trump got elected. I'm not educated into what really is. And about that, I've had a horrible tummy ache.
The hard part is ignorance is easy.
Well,
Especially if you're sitting in a space where you don't have to worry about the ramifications of that ignorance. If your ignorance only affects other people, not yourself, it's easy to be ignorant.
Eventually it comes back to haunt you though.
It will eventually, but oftentimes in somebody else's lifetime, not your own. Which is sometimes what I think people try to do. Let me just keep this while I'm alive and let my kids or grandkids have to deal with it.
right.
It's not really taught in this country anyway, in any accurate form. And now they're even trying to whitewash what there is out there. I mean, I remember learning history in high school even. And most of, I've really delved into history in the last 10 years, and nothing that I've learned in the last 10 years was covered in school.
Yeah.
And now they want to have it even more because ignorance is bliss
Right.
to them.
Right.
It's like if people don't know about these things, like the massacre in was it Oklahoma or something?
Yeah, also.
Tulsa. Yeah, that wasn't even, I mean, they heard that from you for decades.
Right, right.
And if we don't know our history, we are bound to repeat it.
I will say this. I don't think that the history you were taught was wrong. It was just this big.
Incomplete.
It was hugely incomplete. And that's the point of all this, is that whatever you were taught, add this to it and then decide what is history. And that's hard to do if you were taught that this was the complete history of the United States, and all that there was to it. And that's what it's simpler, but this makes you open more books and more minds. Right? And both those can be difficult.
So one of my goals when I was teaching Sunday school was to not teach the kids anything that they were gonna have to unlearn when they grew up. So that limited what resources we could use, because a lot of the stuff for kids is stereotypes and cliches and repeat after me. But now reading this, I realized I was taught a whole bunch of stuff that I'm having to unlearn. And it's
Right.
like, and I'm like, Barbara, I've been talking, every conversation I have to say something about the 1619 project because it's stirred me up so much.
Right.
Part of it was, before we came to Arizona, my school in a small town outside of Chicago was Lincoln School. And I think there was a Lincoln School in every town in Illinois.
Yeah,
And he became more than a saint, and I was really young, and I don't know how that was transmitted to me, but somehow he was this paragon of virtue, and he had liberated the slaves only by being drug into it.
sure.
It turns out. And so demythologizing somebody is like, oh, okay, I have to do this.
Yeah, and it's really difficult. And it doesn't mean that what Lincoln did was bad or wrong, but we have to put it into the whole of what it was and say, he wasn't the God that, you know, the perfect man that we turn him into sometimes. And we like to deify certain people because it's easier than dealing with the whole answer. I love the comment that said something along the lines of the amount that he grew in those few years. If he hadn't been killed, what would have happened?
Yeah.
I love that comment. John?
I grew up, I don't know where it came from, but I did not deify those presidents. I saw them as just human beings. And I don't know why I rebelled against the crap that I was taught about them being gods. I mean, it made me unhappy at the time, and I look back at it, it makes me angry. Also, I think those 13 colonies, it's amazing what they put together with all the different points of view. I think it's incredible. It's got all kinds of problems.
Yeah.
We're living with them today. Those problems were there then, and how people saw a whole group of people. And they did all this justification that they were less than human. And they had to know it was a big lie. Some of them did. Some of them just bought into the crap that they were told and taught.
Can I tell you something a little bit different, where I take it? So what they did is they made the document that worked for them at their time. Right? And I love the comment that was in here. I want to explore it more in a little bit. That what they formed was not a democracy so much as a slaveocracy. Okay, and so they were putting that into place to be able to say, this is what's working for us today. And there's a reason why it worked for them today, at that point. It gave these upstarts the economic ability, that the slave labor that they were using, to break off from the mightiest empire in the world at that time, right? And I think that economics of King Cotton was huge, enormous, right? But I think one of the greatest things they did in this document is they said, but we're not writing the end of this document.
And I think that's where I take an exception, because at the time they drafted the Constitution, Cotton was not king. Cotton was king in the wake of Eli Whitney, who's the real unintended villain of this.
And
No,
tobacco is a
that's-
good thing.
So
It
it
wasn't tobacco, it's sugar.
firmly, most of them firmly believed slavery was going to die of its own natural progression. And they wrote in the 20-year clause, you know, that you can Congress.
But if you read the book says, and it's something that I would want to explore further, they wrote in that clause, not because they thought slavery was gonna die on its own, but because many of the drafters, the people involved in it, were Virginians, and slavery was going away in Virginia. But they wanted, her premise is, they wanted to be able, if they cut off the importation of slaves, it gives a market for northern slave owners to sell their slaves south.
Actually, it was the Virginians who became the master breeders of slaves. They developed this sort of superior attitude to the black belt slave owners.
Yeah.
To whom they sold slaves down the river.
Yeah.
But they were breeding the slaves.
Yeah.
That got sold down. the river.
And we're breaking up the families and starting the processes that I think were especially heinous about slavery as a whole.
Do you think we could write say, this is 2023, do you think the 50 states could write something that they would agree on to form in the United States?
No,
No, I don't think so. So
No.
that's my point. It's amazing. They, as flawed as it is that they were able to put it together. And there was all kinds of silly stuff that was put in there to take care of some of the states that wanted it a certain way.
Yeah.
So I think it's an amazing document. I think it's terribly flawed, and the people that did it were doing the best they could to put it together.
I think it shows one of the basic things about human beings. We have a hard time forming anything that's not to our best interest,
Mhm.
right? And so we put
Absolutely.
like this, the slavery that allows me to be able to profit from the system that's there. And we put this in and it protects it. So I'm not blaming them so much as I'm saying they were very human in doing that. And that it's our job, the recipients of this gift, to continually work to adjust and change and fix what was not perfect in it.
And so to me, that's what really came to me out of this, at least the initial portion of this chapter for me, is the realization, which I guess I've been kind of, I've been thinking a lot about the founding fathers lately and the controversies about renaming schools and buildings and related to the founding fathers, was how much our country has been influenced by the deification of the founding fathers. And then, to me, the realization of this connection to the originalist way of looking at the Constitution. You deify the founders, then what they write, there can be nothing more
Can't
than
fix it,
the
can't
exact
change it.
words they write.
Yeah. And here's what really struck me, to your point here. Civil War. Reconstruction tried to do it within 50 years, essentially failed, less than 50 years, and we went back into pseudo slavery.
Mhm.
We are 50 years past the next big civil rights thing, and that was the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And now it is falling apart.
Right.
How are we going to ensure that Reconstruction doesn't fail for the second time?
how do you think it's not gonna fail? I mean, what's your opinion on that?
Well, I think we have the ability to be able to do things. We have the ability to be able to do exactly what we're doing, learning from history and saying, let's not repeat that. We have the ability to fight in the legislative processes to be able to say, no, we won't let you take away the rights that were
We're
earned.
doing that today, look what's going on, that's what
I
I'm
know.
asking you.
I know, and see, but that's the same thing that tried to happen in the Rutherford v. Hayes, that politically it's easier just to give the South to the South. And we have to not let that happen.
The whole.
Well, hold on, she was waiting first of all.
Sir.
Oh, I mean, this is related. I was really struck with Super Bowl weekend. And there was a really interesting discussion on NPR about the slave mentality in football, and I never quite got it. But when I heard them, and I'm into sports, but when I heard how these guys are deconstructed to measure everything to the point, excuse me, that their testicles are felt up by somebody to make sure that they're not hernia prone. And imagine a room full of naked brown and black men. You know, it's so dehumanizing. I was stunned.
Yeah.
I was just stunned when I heard it. And it's that same mentality that.
How much of that are just the gladiatorial games of America in the Coliseums? Yeah.
The deification
Yeah.
of billionaires.
Yep,
Who
it is.
own these clubs and are making so much money.
That's right. That's right. And, you know, of course, they excuse that by saying, but we're also giving those athletes, you know, a hell of a lot of money. Yes, but how much of that trickles down to, right?
What about they take the money to go to see this?
Yes.
What about?
Yeah. Yeah,
Concussion protocol. They have lowered the bar for blacks.
yeah.
So less blacks even are eligible for concussion help. I mean, it's.
Yeah. And that, so how are we perpetuating things and how are we fighting to make sure that we don't slip back into the same pattern?
What ended Reconstruction in 1876 was the Electoral College. What jeopardizes our democracy today is the Electoral College. We do not have direct democracy.
Right.
To this day,
Yeah,
the last, I can't remember, of the last 5 presidential elections, 3 have been won by the candidate who did not receive the majority of the votes. You know, there's only one way we're going to get rid of the Electoral College, and it's to amend the Constitution.
Right,
which
right.
Will be thoroughly impossible because of the same dynamics that obtained at the time of the Constitutional Convention. The small states will just not surrender.
But that I will say this though, Randy. You talk to somebody in 1840, 1850, they would say it would be impossible to ever pass an amendment that would make blacks equal to whites and have full voting rights.
And it wouldn't have been but for the civil rights or for the Civil War, which essentially removed the Southerners from the Congress that passed that.
And I worry that where we're at right now is leading to a new civil war. And I fear that a lot. And yet sometimes it's that crisis that makes us have to step into a place that we haven't been before. Yes, go ahead, Al.
Jim, you used the term slipping back, and I'm not quite sure that's entirely appropriate. There is a faction of the country that is dragging us back in that direction. Looking at Florida, I won't mention names down there, but the idea of not allowing young people to study their history as it actually was or more developed. I've heard it said that one of the reasons for banning some of the books is they don't want young people to be hurt, to be saddened, to be disturbed by these things. But they never say young Black people. It's implied it's young white people that they're worried about. But I think it goes beyond that. I think they themselves, the adults in the room down there, if I can characterize them as that, they don't want it brought to their attention. They would rather be able to ignore that and go into what is more beneficial for them. Slavery, after the Civil War, I had the idea that a lot of the poor white non-plantation owners who had fought valiantly for the South, for the idea of the Southern mystique, came home to absolutely nothing. The owners of the plantations had basically nothing. The slaves had been emancipated, but they wanted to reconstruct their original economic system. So I think they brought some of the whites in, the returning soldiers and whatnot, and their families in to what we call sharecropping, which is in a lot of ways, like the woman was talking about football. These young fellas are leasing their bodies to an outfit. They may make some amount of money doing that, but you know that the outfit is going to be making a heck of a lot more. And in some people's minds, this country, we're an economic thing. The idea is to make more and more and more money. Yet, when I look back at the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, I hear something that is more heartening, something about valuing humans, even though they don't value all of them at that time. But there was something about it. Was it a economic system they were setting up, or was it a social experiment? I worry that we will go towards a civil war. It's hard to talk to some people about this. Anyway, that's my input for right now.
Thank you. I think that's good input, and that Civil War worries me a lot too. Oh, I'm sorry. Can I have her speak? Because she hasn't spoken yet.
Well, at this point, and maybe like the rest of you,
Can they speak up?
at this point, I started to think of, so what are we gonna do?
Yeah.
Right, maybe we have to do something, and it is always clear, it's always said, well, vote, certainly vote for people who are gonna represent what you want. But I heard something, and it said, besides that, another very strong thing, because I'm very upset about what happened in Michigan State, but, and that's another area, I mean, this would work in maybe too, is, to protest, to be out there. What if we were out somewhere once a month,
What if we were?
saying what we want to say?
Yeah. How do we make visible an alternative to what's easily said? So in Arizona, we have almost always had a completely Republican legislature. That's just what we've always had.
In recent years.
Oh,
And I'm
that's
talking
right.
about the 30, 40 years.
That's right. That's right. Since basically just before the Goldwater years. Before that, you know, that we were always Democratic. Yeah, yeah. But see, my Granny May just couldn't believe that anybody would vote Republican. She said at one point, I don't know which was worse, when your Aunt Eula started smoking, or when your Daddy James started
Voting
Republican. Right? But in my lifetime, Apache County, which was always a Democratic leaning county up until the last 15 years. Always.
But the two parties have changed.
They have.
The Republican Party was the party of Reconstruction. They were, the
Yep.
Democratic Party was the ones that
Yep.
were the Southern slave owners, landowners, and they flip-flopped.
Yeah, but for example, Apache County, you know who represented Apache County for decades? A woman from Globe named Polly Rosenbaum. I mean, she was in the legislature for like 150 years.
No, not that long.
Not that long, but it seemed like it, right? I mean, she took over from her husband, I think in the 40s. And served until I was there in the 80s.
Mhm.
Maybe it was even the 30s, I don't know. It was a long time she was there. And she was a very liberal, great voice to be able to have there. She was not the Dixiecrat type of person. So what we have to do is we have to look and we have to be active. We have to talk to people. Right? Part of this is ignorance feeding ignorance if we're not careful. And part of it is having the guts to be able to be in that conversation with people. We'll come right back to you in a second.
I think part of the problem is, I think Isabel Wilkinson brought this out, was that after the Civil War, like, after the Nazis were defeated, Germany did all this education and all this stuff to like try and they built monuments to like, to educate people so that they didn't want it to happen again.
Yeah.
We did just the opposite. We senators in and brought all these people in this. So now it's like the Confederacy is still put up on a pedestal by a lot of people. We've never, ever in this country made any kind of amends or taken any kind of action that's made this something that was, it's like it was never put down the way that the Nazis were.
Right.
It's like you talk about, you know, it's like in the South, especially Southeast. You know, it's like you were talking about how many congregations are there who are leaving? They're in the Southeast.
Yeah.
Part of me is, I'm sorry. Part of me is like, let's give them the Southeast. I'm sorry, but let's just give them that.
And in some ways, I would love if we could do in our country the same way we're doing in the Methodist Church and forming two bodies. I don't know that we can do that, you know, but that would be simpler, wouldn't it? But I'm not certain it would be as strong for either side, but it would be simpler.
But it's about arguing with each other.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think what we have to do, and I've been telling people, we have to do what the Iranians have done, get out on the street 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
And not stop. Going out there once a month is fine, but I think it's going to have to really step up. Once a month is not gonna do it.
And you have to mobilize beyond yourself too.
Millions out on the street.
Yeah.
24/7, go home, you go to sleep, you come back onto the street.
Yeah, what do we do?
It's my feeling about
Two
it.
things in line with what we were talking about. I remember particularly when I was studying history in high school. And after the Civil War, what really stands out in my mind from the history books is the carpetbaggers and how bad the carpetbaggers. Well, now I've taken more history courses and learned that those carpetbaggers weren't really as bad as they were made out to be, but that's what I was taught, and that was here in Arizona. Yeah, but then, oh, shoot, I just lost, and your thing about, we have to be out on this, you know, the problem is now is getting commitment from people. Making things change does not happen by posting on social media. That will not change anything.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
The problem is there's two things that have big sway here and that in holding us in a space where we don't do anything and also mobilizing other people and giving them power, and that is money and effort. Right?
Money and what was the other one?
Effort, just doing something, using the strength of your body, your voice, whatever, to do and say something. And both of those can be intimidating things to battle or to mobilize.
I think what we have to do, what the Black Lives Matter movement has done and is still doing. And I think all of us have to do that.
Yeah, and it has to be mobilized over, it has to be sustained, I guess is what I'm saying, over a long period of time. And that's hard.
The other thing I would say is it has to be done in such a way that it hurts big business economically. Because, you know, if just getting out on the streets and protesting is going to have no effect. I mean, there's so much in our country that is driven by economics, and that came out in this chapter also.
Yeah.
And unless
I think that's why we have to cut to the chase. I think I'm sorry.
No, it's all right.
I was a lawyer, most of the time a prosecutor, but in the law, which will be our only non-violent, potentially, redress for all of this. I used to tell people, I can't make the crime unhappen. I can only try and get you some measure of justice. You know, personal injury lawyers say, I can't give you your leg back, but I'm gonna try and get you some money. You know, and I think we have to recognize that because of the dynamics of our culture, the only thing that's going to potentially represent some kind of redress for this historic wrong is money. I think if it's called reparations, it's not going anywhere.
No.
People, Americans say, I didn't do it, I shouldn't have to pay for it. But if you say, this is an historically abused portion of our population, they need extra effort, and it's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt you, but you gotta do it because it's the right thing to do. That might work.
It might.
Isn't that affirmative
Jim-
action?
Jim, Al has his hand up for quite a while.
Thank you, Bart. I've thought for some years now that what this country needs is a good national strike. Right now in our Congress, we have a faction that is holding the debt ceiling over us. And if we don't do something about that, it's going to ruin our economy. But even we retirees are a part of the economy. I mentioned that my wife and I get money in and we put money out. We're just a transfer station for it. But if there were one day that all of the non-essential people just stayed home, the movers and shakers, the owners, the CEOs, the big poobahs would realize that they aren't running the country. The workers are running the country. Now I'm starting to sound like a damn socialist, and I don't really mean to, but they have to understand that we are human beings. Talking about this idea of the Civil War, I can see lines being drawn right now. As much as I'd like to give full faith to our justice system, I can't. I really can't anymore after what the Supreme Court's been doing and some of the federal judges. I just don't have a lot of faith in them, quite frankly. But looking at the abortion issue, we have states now that are declaring that they are there for women needing abortions. If your state won't let you have one, come to our state. Now, what's going to happen when that is federally mandated? I think that's going to be a real ripcord on this entire thing. I won't speak for women. I'm not a woman, but I would think that quite a few women are really taking this very, 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 very seriously. I think you'd have almost half the country really up in arms over this. But
We're 5/8. Women are 5/8. And that's one of the things that has got everybody afraid is the people of color now in the United States outnumber any white person. And until we look at the harsh truths economically, I agree with you. It's money driven. Now, is money necessarily the goal I want to be meeting my maker with and say, yeah, I was all about making money. I did da 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 da. No, there are many, many global studies showing and demonstrating human beings are happier and more joyful when being of service. No one wants to not have a job or feel valued or giving something to the community they live in. They want to do that. That's part of our contract coming here in the third dimension. And we, white people in the United States, have not honored that contract. And I will tell you again, stomach ache hurts horribly. Just recognizing that one of my heroes, Lincoln, was not what he's been credited to be in my history books. And just looking at the different pictures, I'm going to go back to we're always and going to have to stay sick as a culture, as a country, until we can take a page from Carl Jung and tell the truth to ourselves. Just flat out look inward and tell the truth to ourselves.
I think one of the things going on is there's so much fear. The Constitution, when it was written, blacks are 3/5 of a human. But there wasn't a lot that was, aside from that degradation, there wasn't anything there I can see that was really anti-black, putting them in their place or whatever. But then Virginia started to pass all those laws, no gathering in groups, no learning to read and write. They became afraid of the black people because there had been uprisings, and they were smart enough to realize that there was a darn good reason for those uprisings. So they wanted to diffuse that as best they could. The Second Amendment wasn't about everybody having an AR-15. It was about local groups being able to band together to put down slave rebellions. It's fear. It's fear. And I think as long as we don't know the history, we're either going to repeat it unwillingly or allow other people to repeat it willingly. And it's no guarantee that we aren't going to be the black guys after the next change.
We're in it. We're in it right now. Don't kid yourself. We are in a massive shift attitudinally, culturally, economically. If you want to choose that as your benchmark, it's devastating. And this being afraid of a rebellion of people of different color, that's the history of the West. Believe me,
So,
that's the history of the West.
so let's just talk about what we do now then. Many of you have mentioned the Supreme Court, and it is awful right now. You should be. No. I want you to listen for a second. Supreme Court was brought that way because people were active in appointing in electing officials that appointed judges and got that put the way it is.
Mhm.
It can be done that way, can be undone, but we have to work at it. We have to say what needs to be done in order to reverse a Supreme Court that is absolutely not what the Supreme Court should be. And that's work, and it starts at a local level. I hate that in Arizona, we have decided that a Republican legislature is all we'll ever have. We've had much better than just what's given to us right now, but we're not as active in that legislature as what we should be. Right now, they're considering a bill. One of the bills before our legislature is to say, if someone walks into a school without intent, but has their concealed weapon there, then they won't be held liable for bringing a gun onto a property.
That's insanity.
That's insanity. Where'd responsible gun ownership go? We should be sitting there saying, I'm sorry, that's not responsible. If he's not responsible enough to know that he has a gun on him, he shouldn't have a concealed weapons permit. And so he should be held responsible. So we've got to stand into those places and speak about those things and be active in that bill making. And we have to be active in electing the leaders that are making those decisions.
One quick note, in Arizona, we get to vote for judges.
We do.
And my sister is a lawyer, and she declares because we vote, that some of the judges the judges never get voted out of office. And there are some horrible judges that keep getting voted back in every year, because when you get to that part of the ballot, everybody's like, oh yeah.
Yeah,
Done
tired of it.
thinking about it.
Tired of it.
Yeah, right.
Well, and we even have a presentation in the church that talked about one specific judge that he got reelected because nobody pays attention. And you know, how easy would it, I can't say it would be easy, but why can't we just start even with just getting rid of some judges and so that they know
Yeah.
that you give them a wake up call.
And I think that's a good point about all this. You may not fix the whole thing in your lifetime. But you begin changing what can be changed, and you make very pointed and intentional ways of flipping the narrative in some way or another.
Also,
Right.
the school board's another really good
Yes.
place to start.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, because they're being taken over, and also our librarians are getting death threats. I
Yeah.
don't know if you know that.
State superintendent of schools.
Yeah, and teachers are, yeah.
So part of what I'm saying is that you're of a mind run for something. Help us, let us be the support for you to be a voice in that arena where you see yourself. Do stuff, right? That's what happened in all of this. What this brought about is it said there is a democracy here. Are we using it? Or are we allowing the bully pulpit to affect everything?
Sorry, but I'm a little bit too old. I'm done. I was out in the streets 60s, 70s, 80s.
I get that.
I'm not doing it today. I can't, sorry, I just can't do it.
Yeah, but the other thing is, how are you sending your money to someone who will do it?
I don't have money.
No, but what I'm saying is, don't speak yourself out of it, is what I'm saying.
I know.
Figure out how you're going to be involved in it, because none of us can affect all of it, right? I don't have $1 million to give to something,
Calls, letters,
but
whatever.
does that make sense? There's things you can do.
Work a lot. And is that, you know, the upper class, there is this, I think we are in a caste system in this country. And it's like when you put, it's like they're saying, they were telling, you know, poor whites, well, at least you're not black. You know, it's like if you pit poor whites against poor blacks, then you're making, they're pitting us against each other. You know, it's like, I just picture these people up here, Jeff Bezos and whoever, you know, are like pulling strings and going, well, let's pick, if we get everybody against each other, then they're not looking at us. And I'm sorry, I'm pretty much a socialist, and I think we need to redefine that word and go back and look at why it's become so demonized. I was gonna say deified. That's not the word.
Demonized.
Yeah. Because it's, you know, it's like
That's right.
back in the day, there was a time that was not such a bad term in this country, but it has been turned into that. If you look in the history of why, that's a fascinating story.
Right. And so a lot of it is education. So who is talking to the younger generations? And how are you making it so that they listen to a voice like yours, not just some other voice that's not there?
And that's part of my thing, that we need to learn how to have dialogue again. And it is incumbent upon us to not make generalizations, to not, you know, just discount somebody, even though what they say is so distasteful. You know, it's a challenge, but I just think we really need to learn how to do that again.
Right.
You have to start with the same facts, though.
And I agree, but there are ways, we just have to learn how to work around it.
I will say that you don't have to start with the same facts. You have to start with a willingness to listen to each other so that I can bring the facts as I know them, and you bring the facts as you know them, and we bring them into a conversation. And we see which one stands up in the conversation.
And you
Uh-huh.
not win,
You may not win.
but you need to have the conversation. And you need to be who you are as an example. That's more important than what you say.
Yeah.
So if you've got some really right-wing friends and they see you the way you are and they know that you're the way you are and what you believe, You may not change them, but you end up with some respect from them about who you are. And that's really critical.
And you also end up with a civil war not happening.
Yeah.
I think I've told you that that's one of the things that I'm working towards figuring out is how to do all this work without killing us all. I don't want the casualties. And and it's not hard at all to be able to see the possibility of casualties, is it? And I think that what's gonna save it, what's gonna stop that is relationship. When we've hit those casualty spaces, it's because we stopped having relationship. Right?
So how many of us have some conservative friends that we can talk to? Now, there's some that you can't talk to. Well, you don't need to talk to them.
You don't have to talk to everybody.
You just want to be yourself. And how many of us have Black friends?
I have way more Black friends than I have conservative friends.
Yeah, after them.
But there's few of us here that are gonna have a lot of Black friends.
Well, maybe the people that you do now.
No, I'm talking about right here. this-
No, I don't. I mean, the people that you do now, those are the ones that have Black here.
Yeah, but I'm talking about us having the experience of having Black friends and hearing what they have to say.
Because that's where we're gonna learn,
Yeah,
is by listening
Well,
to
too,
that.
I mean, it's just one person. I mean, there's, you can get into the economics of whether you're talking to a poor person or a person with money, and what they're gonna say is gonna be very different.
and the hard part is being in a conversation, not in a lecture from either side. Not in a drag out fight. Right? To somehow be in the conversation, it's really hard to keep it in that conversational space, especially in America today. And yet, I think it's one of the essential things. I mean, the backlash towards the 1619 project is an example, right? It was immediately, let me prove that all wrong. Instead of saying, how do I listen to that?
Have any of you taken your book out in public? I had a doctor's appointment last Friday, and I had to read my chapter, so I knew I was gonna be sitting there in the office. And I didn't plan it ahead of time, but I had conversations with 3 people in the doctor's office that I have no idea who they even are.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's great.
I
yeah.
try to keep mine covered up if it's in the car.
Jim, would you speak to this Netflix movie that's come out in response to the 1619 project?
It's a
Yeah.
little-
You're talking about the mini series about the 1619 project?
That's-
Yeah, that's on Hulu, and it is trying to say some of the same things that are here, puts it into a visual form so that for some people it's easier to enter into. If nothing else, if you get a chance, do that, invite some people over to your house and say, let's watch this together
Yeah.
over 6 weeks, because the nice thing about a video project is even if you don't like it and you can't talk afterwards, you only lose a little bit of time. Does that make sense? And so it's a relatively small investment by whoever you invite to be able to maybe have some conversation that will change things.
Also, I wanted to say, I just got an email today from Color of Change. And the 1619 project is on there
Good.
with interviews and everything, and also a lot of other CRT
That's right.
information is on there
Uh-huh.
with interviews and everything. All you have to do is pull it up and listen to it.
That's right. And so what we have to do, one of the things we can do is say, who else can be here? Who else could you invite here? You know, I think a conversation about this in a mixed audience of more progressive and more conservatives would be a really good conversation. Because then you would really get I don't agree with this, here's my take on it, but you would be in a space, hopefully a safe space, where people could say that and we could hear each other's ideas about it.
That's key.
That's what we do, right?
Once there's been the airing of the ideas, we're facing a social problem about which there are different points of view. It's been suggested, and I think with merit, that you just can't talk to some people. And I think that highlights the essence of the problem, which is when you're talking about matters where there aren't an agreed upon set of facts, where there seem to be matters of principle, compromise is impossible. You know, it's not surprising Newt Gingrich is, you know, out in the forefront of this. He was the guy that first came up with the notion that compromise just means you're losing more slowly.
Yeah.
You know,
So let me say two things because it's past our time. That's my 5 o'clock appointment. That's the first thing. And second of all, do you know where Newt Gingrich?
Wait, what?
Do you know where Newt Gingrich lived during all of his time on Capitol Hill? On
Where
Cap-
Newt,
on Capitol
didn't
Hill.
you,
Where did he live?
tell me.
In
quick,
Washington, DC.
Office.
In the United Methodist Building,
Oh, like right next door to the Supreme Court.
in our building. He lived, that's where he
And you let him do that?
lived. So what I'm saying is even somebody as entrenched under that can also be put into a space where there's a possibility of conversation. That's what I think she's trying to spur us to here. She's not saying, she's very clearly saying, here's some of my truth that I want you to hear. She is saying, for me, it is blacks that brought the democracy, not blacks that stood in the way of democracy. But part of the reason she's saying that is so that we converse about that. Maybe disagreeing with her, maybe agreeing with her, but that we converse. All right, thank you
Yes.
for being here. Sorry that I have to go to my appointment.
What's the next assignment?
The next